I mean, I think we're in kind of a golden era of newsletters where, in my opinion, you should get on these platforms because you can get a really high quality subscriber. Like honestly, like Spark Loop, the way that you guys like filter out bad quality subscribers, like that is brilliant. And I really think that we're kind of in this like short window of time of newsletter growth where
Welcome to the Send and Grow podcast. I'm your host, Dylan Redicop. In my day job here at Sparkloop, I spend all my time analyzing how the best newsletter operators and media brands in the world grow and monetize their audiences. I get a behind-the-scenes look at how they're growing their newsletters and driving revenue every day. And there is so much to learn from their success and from their mistakes. And with this podcast, you get that access too. Every week I sit down with a different guest, from industry experts to successful operators, and we go deep on the stuff that you need to know about so you can become really effective at growing and monetizing your newsletter. In today's episode, I'm joined by Yong-Soo Chung, a serial entrepreneur and the brains behind First Class Founders, a content platform built to merge creative content and entrepreneurial spirit. Yong-Soo already managed several businesses under his personal holdco before starting First Class Founders. And instead of starting simple, Yong-Soo dove in headfirst, pairing a weekly newsletter and a high-quality podcast that's featured guests like Jay Abraham, Chanel Basilio, Andrew Warner, and Nick Huber, to name a few. First Class Founders is an impressive content undertaking for someone running multiple businesses, and that's why I wanted to have Yong-Soo on the podcast. We dive into how creators are evolving into company founders and why founders are increasingly becoming creators. Yong-Soo shares why he builds his newsletter in public and the impact it's had on his journey, how he's using his newsletter to grow his podcast, his innovative strategies for newsletter growth, and his predictions for the future of newsletters in the business landscape. Yong-Soo, it's great to have you here. To start us off, could you tell us more about First Class Founders, its audience, and its core mission?
So my name is Yong-Soo Chung. I am a serial entrepreneur. And I guess, in the past 8 years, I haven't really thought about myself as a personal hold co-owner, but, speaking to a lot of other creators and, I stumbled upon this terminology of a personal hold co, and looking at my trajectory, I literally have a personal hold co with 3 other businesses. One is a pocket knife business. One is a French Bulldog business, leveraging my French Bulldog's audience. And the other one is a 3PL. And I guess the fourth one now that's just starting is First Class Founders, which is my podcast and newsletter. And that's really, what I'm kind of focused on now as I transition into, into the next phase of my my career. So First Class Founders is it's a podcast, it's a newsletter for creators and founders, because my belief is that in the future, creators, the ones with large audiences, are engaged, they're going to be creating companies, and I believe that company founders who are real good operators, they're actually going to want to become creators to leverage distribution of their own personal brand. And so I think we'll kind of see this merging of, like, if you'd like imagine a Venn diagram, like that sweet spot in the middle where there's like founders and creators, and kind of like that middle spot is where we're going to end up in the future. And so with First Class Founders, I'm trying to, I'm kind of exploring both sides of audience building and company building, and especially like people who are right in the middle. That is like a really interesting place for me to dive into. And so, that's what I've been up to.
Nice. And so when you say the people right in the middle, you mean the people who are like kind of a little bit entrepreneurial and people who are also, online creators, for lack of a better term. Those are the people you're really trying to target?
Exactly. So
Yeah.
essentially, creators who have built audiences, but they haven't really leveraged them to build companies yet. But I think they will become company operators. And then
Mhm.
founders who are really interested in the company building side. And to be honest, it's like kind of like me, because I've been company building for 8 years now, but I wasn't
Right.
online sharing anything, and now I am. And so I think we'll kind of see this intersection of both professional creators and professional company builders kind of like, do both. And so that's what is really intriguing to me.
Why do you think we'll see this intersection?
Well, I think that, you can already see some of this stuff happening with larger creators. Like, I mean,
Mhm.
talk about like Logan Paul, starting Prime, and, just partnering up with all these brands. I mean, Mr. Beast with Feastables. I mean, these are things that are already happening. and they're happening with larger creators. But I do think that this will trickle down into the smaller creators and more niche creators. So not like the celebrity type creators, but more of the online education, like niche topic creators. I think that
Right.
will also this concept of like creators learning to become company operators will continue. And then on the other side, I think founders are, I'm one myself where I realize that there's a power of like just the media, just getting out
Yeah.
there and sharing, building in public, like sharing your journey. Like this is really powerful to just drive awareness of your brand in a very authentic, natural way where it doesn't feel like a press release, for example, or paid advertising. Because these are, I feel like people are kind of over these things, right? But like
100%.
building something authentic, is something that I think is kind of be the next, I don't know, like good, wave of
PR
almost like,
almost.
yeah, PR marketing, whatever.
Yeah.
But so I think it's important for founders to have an online presence. So from
Hmm.
both sides, it's kind of happening.
Yeah, and I think a really good example. One of the last conversations I had on this podcast was with Bill Kerr, who runs Athena, which is a global talent platform, and he also just in 2023 launched Open Source CEO, which is a newsletter. And so he's like a CEO for a remote SaaS team, and he's started this newsletter, which he's keeping them as two separate entities, but he's really kind of like playing into the creator field as well, because I think he sees exactly what you see, this opportunity to be more authentic, to show your personality, to share learnings and experiences and wisdom, and not have it be this sort of boring formal press release kind of status.
Yeah, I know Bill pretty well, and yeah, I know that's exactly what he's
Mhm.
doing. So I think the smart founders will realize that they need to have a public facing personality to attract, I mean, not even customers, but just people that like your brand,
Mhm.
and they will tell other people about it. And it's just a really good way to engage with the public, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it could help with the recruitment and everything like that
Yep.
too, as well, right? So, um, great. So, I guess like cutting right into the meat of it, you're doing this really symbiotic relationship between your newsletter and your podcast. And I heard you speaking with Jeremy Enns on a recent-ish edition of your podcast.
Yeah.
And Jeremy's a really savvy marketer. He's really good at podcast marketing. That's kind of his that's his niche. That's his forte. He also writes a couple of newsletters too. So you mentioned to Jeremy that you're using your newsletter to funnel people to your podcast. And I'd love to, kind of just start a bit broad and have you talk to us more about your approach to really just like that whole sort of strategy and how you're building first class founders that way.
The way that I see this, is kind of, you got to have a discovery platform. So whether it's, X, LinkedIn, Instagram, whatever it is, you need to be out there, and in the algorithms, unfortunately,
Hmm.
get people's attention. And so constantly posting organic content is great. And then you need to obviously drive people to the next step, which is, in my opinion, the best way to do that is an email list. You can drive people to your website, and then you can have like a pop up or something to collect emails or whatever. But like really, for me, I've just go directly to the email, and just
Hmm.
because it's something that you own. It's an own relationship, and then also it's a very low hanging fruit. Like, it's something where if you just see, oh, like, oh, I can enter my email. Like, it's not a huge commitment. Whereas like a podcast is like, okay, hey, have you, listened to an episode of my podcast? It's like, that's like 20-30 minutes of my time. And it's not easy to really ask your audience for that at that moment in time. And so the best way, in my opinion, is to gather emails, and then the next part of the funnel is getting people to listen to your podcast. And so like that's kind of like my funnel now is like social platforms, then the newsletter, and then the podcast. And then yeah, that's it right now. But then in the future I plan to have a YouTube and everything. So
Right.
that might change, but right now that's what it is.
Right. Just as you were saying that, it got me thinking, like, with a newsletter too, you have you have welcome emails, a
Yep.
welcome sequence. With podcasts, it's like boom, I'm hitting you right away. You got to like invest half an
Yeah.
hour into my podcast. You almost need a welcome sequence for your podcast. Like here's like three snippets of our greatest hits. See if you like it. Just an aside thought. But in terms of newsletters and podcasts, do you think every podcast should have a newsletter, and should every newsletter have a podcast?
That's a good question. I'd say that so you got to think about like audience. So like a lot of podcasters and podcast listeners are not as big into newsletters and vice versa. A lot of newsletter writers or newsletter consumers are not podcast listeners. And I've actually found this to be true when,
Hmm.
when I send out newsletters, some people don't know that it's a podcast newsletter type thing, right? And so they'll be like, "Oh, I thought there's going to be more content on this." And I was like, "Well, the content is there, it's just that you prefer to just read it versus consuming it on audio, right?" And so I think it's really you got to do both in my opinion because your audience hangs out in both, whatever they're
Mhm.
doing. But I think that for podcasts because it's so hard to get discovered on, just randomly,
Yeah.
that a newsletter serves as a natural almost like a discovery platform for podcasts. And so I do think each podcast needs to have a newsletter and a newsletter. I don't think necessarily needs a podcast, but I just think it's a low hanging fruit. So if you're writing a newsletter, then you can just narrate it yourself and you can have an audio version of your newsletter as a podcast and that will just, you know, whatever, increase your distribution, right? So
Yeah.
I just think you got to do both. Yeah.
Well, there's people who have to commute a long ways to work, and
Right.
maybe their favorite newsletter, they just, by the time they actually get to work, they don't have time to read it. They don't have time to read it before work. If you had an audio version of it, there's probably a good number of people who would just love to, listen to the 15-minute version of it of your newsletter on their way to work. So, and it's low lift if you've already written it
Right.
to just, hit record. So I think that's a good piece of advice. I was going to ask you when does it make the most sense to pair a newsletter with a podcast, but I think that's a really good example. Can you give us, so you've got first class founders where you are doing, quite a bit. If anybody has listened to your podcast, they can hear the level of time you put into
Mhm.
it. There's a lot of editing that goes on. I know you have a podcast editor that helps you with that, but there's a lot of thought and preparation that goes even into it before you hand it over to the podcast editor. So and on top of that, you're writing the newsletter. So can you give us like a behind the scenes look at what a week in the life of first class founders for you is like? What does a typical week look like to get the podcast, produced, recorded, published, and then the same thing with your newsletter?
Yeah. So I am a huge fan of delegation. And
Nice.
so to be honest, it doesn't take me that long, which sounds crazy.
It does. I
So
believe you, but it does.
I have a producer who's amazing and he takes out a lot of the work himself for the podcast stuff.
Mm.
So he actually scripts a lot of my narrations and also obviously I'll do for the guest interviews, I will do the interviews and then um, he will pick out sound bites and essentially he'll create a script based on those sound bites. But obviously we will sync up. So we have a sync up every Monday
Okay.
for about an hour and we just discuss, hey, like what are the big themes for this episode? And then we kind of craft the theme and then he'll go back and like get the sound bites that we need to do to craft the episode. And so a lot of times like that's going to also be on me to make sure that I'm asking the right questions during the podcast interview. And so
Hmm.
I'm always thinking about the packaging of the episode. So like for example, um I want the podcast interview to have some kind of like progression or theme. And so for example, like I really like to have, I don't know, steps. So like 10-step process into doing X, Y, and Z. And so I'll get when I talk to someone on on Riverside, which is what we're using.
Hmm.
I'll essentially lead them down that path of steps 1 through 10 with like different stories. And so I like to think of the packaging beforehand. I'll discuss it with my producer, but then once it's done, then it's all on him to create the script. And then I'll do a secondary narration. Like he'll give me the script and then I record the little bits and pieces of narration that go in between the sound bites. And then after that, I do a bunch of takes. So essentially,
Okay.
he'll give me back the script and say, hey, you're meant to say because of, but you actually said, and of whatever. And so like, can
Mm.
you retake this? And so I have retakes to do. And so
Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely a process, but I feel like the end product is pretty good.
Hmm.
And really, I've delegated a lot to my producer, and so he just essentially just tells me what to do. I'm almost like it's almost like I'm an actor, and
Yeah,
like
you're a talent. You're hired talent.
I'm a talent, and yeah, exactly, and I'm told what to do almost. And then on the newsletter side, I have an executive assistant who sets up the newsletter structure each week.
Okay.
Literally, she coordinates the cross promos with other newsletters. She gathers all the newsletter metric and stats, and all I need to do is give her the links. So I have a section in there where I find cool links that I stumble upon on the weekends or
Yeah.
whatever, and so I'll put those links in, and then I'll do my little blurb, and then that's it. She does the podcast cover art. She does all the everything else. But I just need to read through it and make sure it's in my voice. And so I'll make sure that
Hmm.
it's not just like, some copy that's not personal. So I will like change up the copy if necessary.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
for the most part, it's all written. So all I have to do is just kind of paraphrase it here and there, and then do the links, and that's about it. So
Wow.
yeah.
Wow. That's awesome. So, how much time would you say per week, on average, would it take to get the podcast produced? Including your hour meetup and then also your newsletter created.
I
How
would
much
say
of your time
probably about 4 hours
each or total?
total per week.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
That's you got to fine tune. That's awesome. It's impressive.
Yeah.
So thanks for sharing that. I really appreciate that. I think a lot of people would be interested to, because on the surface, it looks like a ton of work, but when you really are able to delegate like you are, and have the capacity and the ability to hire out people to support you, then once you get systems and processes in place, that really helps. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
Last year, we launched the most generous affiliate program in the newsletter space. Send just a handful of newsletters our way, and you could unlock tens of thousands of dollars every month. And now, we're turning up the heat. We're sending our top-earning affiliate partner, with a +1, on a free, all-inclusive trip to Cancun. You can win! Just share SparkLoop with newsletter operators before April 30th. They get free access to the most popular newsletter recommendations network and unlock millions of dollars in easy extra revenue by recommending the world's best newsletters. You get a 30% commission. Win-win. It's that easy. See you on the beach.
You spoke at the very beginning about your personal holdco, and you posted on Twitter that over the number of years that you've had it, you've got it to over $20 million.
Mm-hmm.
You're very open about your growth and your revenue with First Class Founders as well, your newsletter and your podcast. And so I'm wondering, a lot of people hold, especially, financials closer to their vest. They don't necessarily want to show all their cards. So why are you building this all so publicly? Where do you see the benefit to you for doing that?
The first thing I'll say actually is that I don't believe building in public is for everyone, and I think there's a place and time for it, but I think that eventually, as you grow and scale and you get to a certain stage, I actually think it might hurt you.
Mm.
And so I'll kind of explain that in a bit. Basically, at the beginning stages of any project, like First Class Founders, um, what I'm trying to do is get people to follow along on my journey. And by sharing metrics and things that I'm learning, whether it's good or bad, it really kind of, I don't know, it creates this sense of community and this sense of like, oh, I really want to see, First Class Founders succeed.
Right.
Right. And so it's a really good thing in the beginning, to get that initial, I don't know, traction or like people that are interested in help, like kind of seeing you grow.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm doing First Class Founders in public. Now, I think that at a certain point, let's say it grows, and I mean, who knows, but let's say it's super successful and it's, one of the top shows or whatever. Then at that point, I don't think you need like the purpose of like the stuff that I just told you, like I don't think it serves that purpose anymore. It's almost like everyone already knows about the show, and like it's almost like people will listen carefully and like see how you're doing it, and they'll just copy you right at a certain point. And so I think there's this inflection point where you want to build in public to a certain point, but then once you get to a certain stage, it doesn't make sense to continue doing it that way. And I don't know what that inflection point is, and it's very different depending on what you're sharing in public. Like if it's a SaaS company, then it could be once you hit, I don't know, like let's say 100K MRR or something, whatever it is. But like
Mhm.
people will also look at you and be like, wow, like I'm not relatable anymore. This guy is
Right.
way successful and he's way ahead. And therefore, like, I need to follow someone else who's like just a little bit ahead of me. And so, like,
Mhm.
at a certain point, it doesn't make sense, but it's really good at the beginning stages, in my opinion.
To just lay it all on the table, show people how you're doing it.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. So, do you think more newsletters could benefit from, or let's even not necessarily newsletters, but content creators could benefit from building in public?
Um, I think so. If your audience is the people who are going to be following along on that journey.
Hmm.
So, for example, like if I'm writing a newsletter for, I don't know, car lovers, and I'm like writing and I'm saying, hey, I have 10,000 subscribers for this newsletter. I don't know if people would really care. Like those car lovers would really care. But like because it's creators and founders, it's business oriented. That I feel like it kind of it works because they're curious about the business side of first class founders, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so it has to make sense in that regard also. Like the audience has to be curious about how I'm growing the business and things like that in order to make sense.
Yeah, and which it does. So that the way you're doing it, it would. That's a good example. If the car aficionados as well
Yeah.
might not be on Twitter caring about how people are building car newsletters. Um, what do you think is let's shift a little bit to growth now. Where are you at for subscribers for first class founders these days?
Just north of 12,000 subscribers.
Okay,
Yeah.
nice. And roughly a year old.
Roughly about a year old. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So, how have you gotten to 12,000? That's about 1,000 subscribers a month, which to some people might not maybe seem like a lot, but for me, who's tried to grow a newsletter myself, and never really surpassed the 5,000 point after over 2 years, like to me, that's pretty impressive. So,
Yeah.
how did you go about growing the newsletter?
Yeah. So I talk about 5 growth levers of newsletter growth. And
Mhm.
so the first growth lever, which I think everyone should start with, is just organic content. So find a discovery channel like X, LinkedIn, whatever, and just start getting your ideas out there and just start getting people on your newsletter. Just be like, hey, I'm gonna. Did you like this? Like, I'm gonna write more about the top 10 things I learned doing X, Y, and Z next week. Sign up if you want to learn more. And like, it'll be slow at the start. Like everyone has
Mhm.
to start slow, but you'll start to get trickling in subscribers here and there, and so that's kind of the first growth lever, which is like just organic content, right?
Mhm.
The second growth lever is partnerships and collaborations, and so this is cross promoing with other newsletters who may also be in the same subscriber range as you are. So let's say you're around like 1,000 to 3,000 subscribers. Like you could start reaching out to people, join a community. There's a bunch of Discord communities out there for newsletters. Just talk to them, get friendly with them, and then work out a deal where you're like, oh, I'll post, about your newsletter if you post about mine. And the deal can be, it doesn't have to be one for one. So if you have a larger newsletter and you want to be in there, and you have a smaller newsletter, you can do like a 3 for 1 or like a 5 for
Right.
1. So it doesn't always have to be a 1 for 1. And then one other way that or I guess there's 2 other ways. The giveaways are, in my opinion, they're underutilized, but it's a little bit of hit or miss. But I've done one, and it brought in some high quality subs, which was, to be honest, a little bit surprising. But it did work. But there's a lot of coordination involved. Like you got to have people like opting in and stuff.
Yeah.
So there's that. And then the last thing I'll talk about is recommendations. And so, using when someone signs up for a newsletter, there's like a recommendation engine that pops up.
Widget or whatever. Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
And so using that to reaching out to other newsletters who are growing fast. And so here you don't care about newsletter size, you want the growth rate because that's going to determine how often that widget is shown to other possible subscribers. And so those three things are for collaborations and partnerships. The next thing I would look at is virality, which is a referral program. And so you really need a good core base for a referral program. And so I'd say, I dabbled with referral programs around the 10,000 subscriber mark. And I actually had a longer piece that I wrote, and I called it like Yong-Soo's private journal. And so you can start reading those after just one referral. And so best practices for a good referral program: make it really simple, have the first reward be at the one referral
Mm-hmm.
mark, and then I think it's like 3, 5, 7, or 10. Like, just make it really, really like, don't go from like 1 to 10 because then it's like
Yeah.
such a high barrier. And don't make try not to do something that requires like shipping out something physical like stickers or like, because that is a whole different operation thing that you don't really want to mess with. And so keep things digital if you can for referral
Right.
programs. So that's the referral program. And then as you grow, you'll start to get some sponsors in. And so the fourth lever that I like to talk about is direct sales, which is like you're literally going out and like trying to get sponsors yourself. And so the sponsors is really interesting because once you start getting the revenue in, then you can actually utilize it with the fifth growth lever, uh, which is essentially it's going to be paid ads, right? So
Yeah.
you can do the sponsorships, use that money to do paid ads, and you're essentially kind of recycling this money and back and forth, and you got this nice flywheel going of like newsletter growth. And that's exactly what I did, because I'm doing the paid ads along with the sponsorships, and essentially I'm just growing the newsletter. I'm compounding it, and just like it's snowballing, right? And so um you want to continue doing the stuff that you're doing. So like all these growth levers that I talked about, like you don't want to stop one because you're doing the other one. Like continue doing all
Mm.
those. Like I'm still doing the cross promo stuff in my newsletter, reaching out to other newsletter subscribers or newsletter operators. So like that's still going while I'm doing all this stuff. And that's how you get that like hockey puck, was it hockey stick growth
Hockey
curve?
stick. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's yeah, that's kind of the five growth levers that I like to use for a newsletter.
And would you, so because there's five, do they start at different stages? I know you
Yeah,
did mention like organic at the
yeah.
start, and you do kind of have to start getting revenue in before you do the fifth one. But is there any reason why you couldn't um, start doing them all right away?
You can. I think it's pretty like it's overwhelming. I would say if you try to do
Mm-hmm.
all of them at once, and it won't be as effective. For example, like the referral program. Like you can't do a referral program if you have like 10 people on your newsletter, right?
No,
And
that will not
so
work.
I think there's like different stages of growth or tactics for each growth stage. And for me, I think that's a natural progression, is the one that I mentioned just now. But you could definitely do like paid ads early if you have the money for it and you don't
Yep.
care spending a little extra in the beginning to get really ramp up. Definitely do that because it'll get you to sponsorships way faster, right?
Yeah.
But I'd say 80-90% of people listening to this will probably start with organic and then work themselves up to through these five growth levers.
Which makes sense. I mean, it's the low hanging fruit, and the free, quote unquote, free traffic just costs you your time to do those organic growth levers. So that does make sense. I noticed a post from you, and we'll be wrapping up here. I think this is a good way to wrap it up because you recently posted about your 2024 newsletter
Yeah.
predictions. And so, what do you think is the most impactful or the biggest change that you predict we'll see in the newsletter space? I mean, even if you wanted to rattle off a few of the other predictions by all means. But I'd be curious what you think what's going to impact the newsletter space the biggest in this upcoming year.
Yeah, I think that the newsletter space is evolving very quickly, and it's because we have amazing ESPs now, and they're becoming. It's almost like the newsletters are becoming discovery platforms now. And what I mean
Mm,
by that is because of great tools like Sparkloop, and so essentially when you subscribe to one newsletter, you get recommended a few others based on similar audiences. And so this mechanism has never really been available, I'd say what, 2 years ago, two plus years ago.
yep.
So I mean, I think we're in kind of a golden era of newsletters where in my opinion you should get on these platforms because you can get a really high quality subscriber. Like honestly, like Sparkloop, the way that you guys like filter out bad quality subscribers, like that is brilliant. And I really think that we're kind of in this like short window of time of newsletter growth where this discovery period of newsletters is there, and I think that eventually it will get arbitraged out. That's just what I think.
How do you
um
mean?
I think the cost will get much higher, for example. um and so like getting a subscriber on Sparkloop, like a really high quality subscriber, is going to cost a lot more than it is costing now.
Got it.
So
And
I
when you say
think,
sorry, just when you say high quality, you mean like somebody's going to actually open an email, engage with it to some degree,
yeah,
right? Who's
yeah,
a qualified. Okay.
yeah. And then I also like to filter out for US based only. And this is actually one other small tip for newsletter operators is that a lot of sponsorship folks want to see US based audience. And so
Mm,
as one of my filters, I actually have it's got to be US based. And so like 98% of my audience is US based. It's because I filter
got it.
out everyone else. Um, and so yeah, I mean, I think that the ability to do that, just what I talked about, is like really powerful. And like even with US only, which is the highest quality or the most expensive subscriber, like it's still pretty good in terms of the price or the cost. And so I think that's really, we're in this golden era, and I feel like it's only gonna. I don't know. I think that it's gonna close this little like opportunity here.
Mm,
The next thing I would look at is like I think that we're in this like I think B2B newsletters. I'm really bullish on them, and that's also why I'm trying to build First Class Founders for business owners. Like the topics that I talk about on First Class Founders aren't like extremely basic stuff. It's a little more advanced,
right.
and that's on purpose because I want that B2B audience. And so I think people with B2B audience, because also you got to remember B2B is not as easy to reach than B2C. So for example, when you run ads, right, on whatever Meta or Twitter, like you
Yeah.
can't really, it's harder to target B2B audience than a B2C audience. And so
Hmm.
sponsors are really, they want to get in front of B2B audiences, and like it's harder to do that through these like ad platforms. So I think I'm
Yeah.
pretty bullish on B2B stuff. So I want to continue to build my audience for B2B. Um, and so yeah, I mean those are kind of the big ones that I see. I think that the newsletter will also serve as like I think we'll move away from like just a newsletter business. I think we'll start to see more like newsletter will be like a part of a business,
Hmm.
but I think we'll get away from the notion of like, oh, this
Build the
is a
next morning
newsletter
brew.
business. Yeah, I mean, even Morning Brew is moving. They have a
Hmm.
lot of other channels now. I mean, they have a
Yeah.
podcast, they have like community, like so. I think we're moving away from just newsletter based businesses, and it's going to be more holistically fit into like a larger thing. And the newsletter just happens to be one of the distribution mechanisms. And
Yeah.
so I think we'll continue to see that, and I think that the industry will evolve that way as it continues to mature.
Yeah, I can see that,
Yeah.
and it's interesting too because it kind of all starts with the newsletter with that email
Yes.
address that is so vitally important, that list, so you can actually reach your audience when you want to. Well, Young, so you've shared a ton of really Well, I found very, very interesting insights here, and I really appreciate you coming on the show. I think our listeners are really going to get a lot out of it. Could you share with us where we can find you and First Class Founders?
Yeah. So firstclassfounders.com/newsletter is where you can sign up for the newsletter. And then you can find me on X or LinkedIn at Yong-Soo Chung. That's YONGSOOCHUNG.
Awesome. Thank you, Yong-Soo. I really appreciate you coming on, and best of luck in 2024.
Thanks, Dylan. Appreciate it, man.
Take care. Thanks for checking out this episode of the Send and Grow podcast. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to show your support. And we'd love to hear your feedback, so drop a comment below letting us know your number one takeaway, or share with us who you think we should interview next. All of the links for the show are available in the description below. Thank you so much for your support, and we'll see you next time.